Art Bell has passed away at the age of 72 years old. And this actually brings forth memories of my grandmother. And I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. Radio host Art Bell, famous for his show Coast to Coast AM and its X-Files, a flavored focus on the paranormal, died Friday. His fans will note was Friday the 13th at age 72, according to Nevada authorities. Bell died at his home in Nevada, and that was announced on Facebook. Art has been described as a longtime resident of the area, so it looks like he came back from the Philippines. And authorities there have announced that an autopsy to confirm the cause of death will be performed later this week. Coast to Coast AM confirmed the news on Twitter, saying that staff was profoundly saddened with the news that the creator and original host of Coast to Coast AM, Art Bell, had passed away at the age of 72. Quote from Twitter, "We are profoundly saddened with the news." According to a obituary shared by the program, the show became syndicated across the country in 1993 and drew in listeners with its wee-hour chatter and conspiracy theories and aliens, shadow people, and spectral energy. Interesting use of words from, and this is from Fox News, spectral energy. The obituary said that as Bell, quote, begins his journey on the other side, we take solace in the hope that he is now finding out all the answers to the mysteries he pursued for so many nights with all of us. Even after relinquishing his title as host in the early 2000s, Bell returned to the airwaves now and then, and he also started a show for satellite radio. Before Coast to Coast AM began, Bell, who was born in 1945, was in the Air Force during the Vietnam War, and there he indulged his childhood passion for radio by operating a pirate radio station. The show tweeted a comment from its current host, George Norrie, who described Bell as a legend, a radio icon, who went against the grain and developed an amazing show called Coast to Coast AM. His impact on my life is beyond words. He will be missed, but I know now he's on another journey. Okay, the first thing that I want to say is passing on is natural. It happens, and it tends to happen to people when they're in their 70s or in their 80s. Art Bell also smoked a lot. So I understand people being saddened for those that pass. I remember being in tears when my grandfather passed at, I believe it was the age of 74. And it would be actually a day later that he would pass, I believe. I recorded my first recording of Outside the Box TV, I believe on the 28th or 27th of November. And my grandfather passed the next day. I remember my sinuses were clogged with that. Attempting to breathe while being a little bit sick at the funeral. But I also know that it's a part of nature, and that, you know, we should also share a little concern for the innocent people that die way before their time, that don't get a chance to live to age 72. That don't get a chance to reach the world, either through YouTube or, in the case of Art Bell, the radio show. Now, the fond memories of Art Bell, hearing his voice, stem not so much from my experience listening to Art Bell, but from how Art Bell was my grandmother's kind of way of imagining the world outside the box in a way that she and a lot of other Americans were comfortable with, even people that are Republicans and Democrats. I believe she was a Democrat while my grandfather was Republican, like a lot of households. These are my mother's parents. Sometimes there are different politics. So, you know, like a lot of people of her day that were watching media in the 1990s, they were hating on Rush Limbaugh for his kind of sensational type of delivery, and they would listen just for that reason, because he irritated them, just like the Howard Stern model. And then Art Bell would come on at night, and I remember it was 1994, 1995. More so, yes. I went to live with her right after my 15th birthday. in 1995, and it was in Longview, Washington. And so my bedroom was near hers, and I can hear the radio on all night long, and it was on Art Bell. And you know, I had already been exposed to other theories regarding we're not alone in the universe, and was still, you know, in a stage of developing my own ideas. But for a lot of people in this nation, Art Bell would have been their introduction to the idea that our reality is not as it seems. Before the Matrix, and for people that never were introduced to concepts or books like 1984, Brave New World, or even The X-Files. Of course, we can also ask ourselves, was that the agenda of the programmers on Clear Channel, maybe part of an ongoing Project Bluebeam type of predictive programming to have a show amp up reporting on UFO sightings during a period in which there was an increase in UFO sightings that were nationwide stories. So there is that type of coincidence. And so this isn't at all a video that is attacking Art Bell, but it's not a video, right, that's just all about, well, Art Bell passed, and we're going to act like it's another celebrity death and act like, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel right now. And that's one of the strange things that I noticed about Facebook was, especially last year, a big focus on celebrity deaths and people acting like they personally lost something from a celebrity passing on to, and I can understand if it was someone that was like a spiritual teacher or someone that really inspired them or gave them information, but straight up entertainers of either Hollywood or music, for example, people that sang songs, I just don't identify with that. But someone that introduced someone to ideas that changed their actual life, that I can understand. And so he's not a person in which I consider to be an inspiration. He's someone, though, that I consider to be a trailblazer, a person that came before me, a person that came before Alex Jones, who was one of the first individuals on the radio, period, to be sharing an outside-the-box idea with his audience that reality is not as it seems. And those ideas became mainstream before movies like The Matrix. And then, of course, you know, who can dislike that intro? You know, if it wasn't for copyright infringement and things like that, I'd be using more music, and he had the rights, of course, to use that. But that was a really good introduction. I remember listening to the Coast to Coast show in the year 2000, and the sense of imagination that I felt that year listening to that particular program while I worked late into the night at the Shell gas station in Canby, Oregon, graveyard. I don't normally talk about those years in which I worked graveyard up until 6 o'clock in the morning at a gas station in my 20s during those challenging years that I had. But yes, and there was a sense of the whole world was changing. And a radio show like that was documenting it, whether or not I was fully conscious in the moment and things of that nature, you know, but I could feel that something was in the air around the time of the 2000s and going from 1999 to 2000. And that's why I was going through a lot of intense changes in my own life and pain. And while people were, you know, focused on Y2K and a type of catastrophe coming, I don't think that people were wrong about the catastrophe. I think it did happen. I think the staged event of 9/11 was the catastrophe, and it led to a catastrophic war and wars without end, and people being marginalized because of that day. I mean, this is like end times event on another level if you have the empathy and heart to feel and see it. What's become of our world since 9/11. So just because they were off by about, you know, a year and a half, and it wasn't like a solar flare, it was a major event that changed our nation forever. And I felt the creep up. I felt the creep up in the late 90s, kind of like a great evil or something climaxing. It was more than us coming up on the year 2000. It was evil showing itself before 9/11 in our society, in the rise in violence, in the rise in violent programming. Absolutely. And being a kid growing up in the 80s, I can even remember when on the WWF, now the WWE or WE, it went from hero to villain. And just like, and it's an interesting sociological study, how they went from having actual heroes although they weren't all that heroic, but how they went from where wrestling was to the demonic depiction that it is. And so I think it was very timely. And we don't necessarily have to look at it like a conspiracy, even if we can see the element of, I could see how they would want an Art Bell guy on the radio to frighten people up, aliens and UFOs while they actually run their own black op programs. But things could also be a coincidence to where they just happen to coincide together. And criticism, Art Bell, this made me angry, called those that question the official story of 9/11 in one particular program, I believe it was white trash or trailer trash. It was derogatory. And that was a period in which I was not listening to Art Bell when he was hosting Coast to Coast, but I would when it was George Norrie. Because George Norrie would have on a lot of guests and maybe ask questions of a certain tone. And I would prefer someone in some cases that sounds a little less skeptical, like, wow, that sounds weird. And with Art Bell at times, I'm thinking, I don't think you're the one to be turning your nose up at people that live in a trailer, where that's coming from, bro. I don't know, bro. But you're the guy talking about aliens and Mel's Hole. If you're going to go into those fringe elements, and black ops, seems hypocritical to go with the official story of 9/11. And so that's something that I always remembered. That someone can purport to be the person to expose the ops of the government, to also be one to catapult the idea that the government wants us to believe. So I'm saying that to be fair. But ultimately, none of us are perfect. And Art Bell, Coast to Coast, the other hosts on Coast to Coast, people like George Norrie, others, they have created a platform and they've set an example, and whether it was done for money or marketing purposes or other, we don't have to look at it from the negative and stay stuck on those things that we didn't like, nor do I. We could think about like the good that they did, those early outside the box ideas, because prior to Art Bell, I can't really think of anybody. I can't really think of someone in the 1970s. I can't really think of someone in the 1980s. And I'm sure there were other people out there that may have had their own shows. There's another movie that comes to mind other than They Live, and it's Pump Up the Volume. And so even from a period of a young age, I associated myself with the contrarian holding the microphone. And even when I was 12 years old, I would practice interviewing my grandmother. And even though I'm not a fan of Rush Limbaugh, as a younger kid seeing him on TV, I thought that was kind of cool, whatever Rush Limbaugh was doing with this particular program. So I enjoyed, during his TV phase. And I think, watching some of those are kind of comical for nostalgic purposes. So I would have fun interviewing my grandmother about her disdain for Rush Limbaugh. I still wish I had those tapes. And I was literally 10 years old, 11 years old. And, maybe the seeds were planted unconsciously later on in life when I would fall asleep as well. And my grandmother would be proudly listening to none other than Art Bell with Coast to Coast AM. That was, I believe, previously called something else. And so Art Bell is a trailblazer. And he is certainly going down in history for that.